Hello, in this video we're going to be taking a quick look at Caroline, a legendary grade DPS class Elune. Looking at her base stats when she becomes 6 stars, you'll notice that she has quite decent HP for a DPS, not too high but also not low. Her attack is good, starting at 6k, with her physical and magic defense both at 2.7k. Her attack speed at 107 means that she is not too slow, but also she is not the fastest. Her crit, starting off at an 84, allows her to get more crit through gear easy to get the crit rate up on her, which she will need for her first skill mainly. Looking at her as we move up through the grades, as I almost forgot to do, her HP does go up to a 45k, which is quite nice, with her attack ending at a very high 10.9k. Her physical and magic defense remain the same, equal to each other, that is, at 4.9k, which is good and will help her in her skills. Now let's move to the skills. Her normal skill, the first skill, is a magic damage skill that is a multi-hit skill. It'll hit 8 times, dealing a total of magic damage equal to 110% of her attack plus a starting amount. This attack, though, does have some advantages and disadvantages. The first disadvantage is that if it does not land as a crit, it will miss, or you will see evade listed instead of any damage at all. So if you do not crit on the target with this skill, it will just be a 0 damage to the target. However, when you do crit, the crit damage that you do is increased by 50%, meaning that every time you do crit, the damage is increased by a significant amount. So, higher crit rate for this skill is good, as the damage that you will do is a lot, and this skill does have a good base multiplier. As the skill gets leveled up, the damage that it does go up quite significantly to 1170 plus 158% of her attack as magic damage. Again, this still stays at 50% additional damage, crit damage. It is still a very hard-hitting, high damage skill, just for a skill 1. It is single target though. Moving on to her special skill, which is her best skill for killing or nuking bosses down at pretty much any stage. This skill starts channeling and channels for 1 turn, meaning that once you use it, she will not attack on that turn. She will instead go into a channeling state. During this time, she will be able to participate in team-up attacks, but she will just be channeling, and she doesn't attack on the initial turn that you use this. After the channeling ends though, this attack hits 6 times and does a very high amount of damage. This damage at level 1 is 380 plus 255% of her attack as magic damage. The damage increases by 10% for each buff that she has. So every buff that she has, the damage will increase by 10%, which is a significant amount. When the attack lands as a crit, it will inflict Blaze and a weaken effect that reduces the magic defense by 50% for 3 turns. So it is also nice as a debuff, and the Blaze will add additional damage as it happens. When this skill gets leveled up to the max, the damage goes up to a very high, almost 22.7k plus 362% of her attack. The damage increase also goes up to a 15% increase for each buff that she has. The magic defense reduction effect that she lands if it crits on any of the attacks is a 75%, which means that anything else hitting the target for magic damage will also have a significant increase in damage as well. Moving to her ultimate skill, this skill is a multi-hit skill that does an AoE at hitting all enemies. This one hits for 14 times and deals a total of 140% of her attack plus 200 magic damage to all enemies. If she kills anything, or if any enemy dies as a result of this skill, she gains a soul effect that increases her speed by 50% for 3 turns. This is a soul effect, which means that her passives will not affect it, which is important and is why this is a soul effect and not just a standard buff. This speed increase does allow her to move more efficiently and quicker, allowing her to gain turns very quickly to cycle back up to her other abilities. The soul consumption of this skill is also reduced by 1 for each buff that she has, up to 3, meaning that this skill can be used at the cost of only 3 souls if she has 3 buffs, which is also a very nice thing. As the skill is leveled up, it goes up to a 1.2k plus 198% of attack as magic damage. The speed increase goes up to a very significant 100%, allowing her to get turns very quickly for those 3 turns. She should be moving quite often after using the skill, but again, you need to kill something. So this is good for killing trash waves or trash mobs next to bosses, if there are any, while she can still be hitting everything else, including the boss, and then allow her to do that. This is the first passive of her, Unstable New Material. Now, what this passive does is it takes the physical and magic defense that she has and reduces them to 0, meaning that she will not have any physical or magic defense at all in battle. Now, looking at her stats, you can see what they are, but she will not have any physical or magic defense at all. But instead, those 2, physical and magic defense, are added together and then added to her attack, her base attack, meaning that her attack will be very high. As these 2 stats can be added together, it is very nice and also advantageous to her to have as much physical and magic defense as possible, as they are equal to just attack stats on gear. Moving to her passive 2, this one increases attack by 50% after she attacks, but that buff is removed if she takes any damage. So if she, for example, uses her special skill to go into a channeling state, it is worthwhile to instantly pass a turn to her so that she can use that to increase her attack by additional 50% for that skill. If she takes any damage after getting an attack, this buff is removed. The third passive, Image Converter, this one, when she gains a buff, anything other than just attack, that buff will get changed into an enhanced buff that increases her attack by 20%. This is for 3 turns. She can have up to 3 additional buffs of this attack increase of 20%. If you use her with something like Wei Wei, who buffs her special skill to increase physical and magic defense, instead that buff will not affect her physical or magic defense at all, as it is 0 already, but instead that buff will get immediately converted into a 20% attack buff. So buffing with Wei Wei does not provide her any damage reduction, but it does provide her with an additional 20% attack. Any other buff that you try to give to her, such as a defense increase, will also instantly be converted into an attack buff. The only thing that you really can give her to help her have some sustain is a shield. For example, from Freya or Stella, you can give her a shield, and that shield will give her some survivability or some damage reduction or mitigation. The attack buff from Wei Wei, though, however, from Wei Wei's ultimate skill, will take effect as a standard attack buff. As it is an attack buff, it will be the Wei Wei's version of it and not be converted into a 20% only case. This means that your Wei Wei, if it is maxed out, it will have roughly a 90% increase in attack Caroline will get that benefit, that 90% benefit. And then with Wei Wei's second buff being converted over to an attack increase of 20%, Caroline will now have the attack buff of 90 plus the attack buff of 20 from Wei Wei's two buffs. Moving on to her skill gems, some of the first skill, which is a skill, this one has the effect is 2 blues and a violet. Now, if you go with this one, it gives a chance to panic the target when it lands as a crit. You can use this. I have it for right now, but later I do plan to change it out to orange so that it has a higher crit rate. And when I do, I will be changing all 3 so that this skill has a higher crit rate. Because as you remember, this skill, if it crits, it will do more damage. And since it only has the option of critting or missing, critting being the preferred alternative, you would want to have as much crit rate as you can. So giving this skill 3 orange gems would be the better way to go, allowing this skill to have a higher crit rate. So the better the orange gems that you can put on it, the better for her. My goal later will be to have either all 5-star or 6-star orange gems across her, which I will probably be changing out in the next few days or weeks. As far as her second skill is concerned, this skill is good if using with PvE non-boss type situations to keep this as the skill gem bonus, as it provides additional magic damage from the 2 blue gems and an additional crit rate from the orange gem. It is not bad to have anyway, as the skill will do more damage, and having the higher crit rate allows it to crit more often. The bonus from this is an instantly killing the enemy a 5% chance. While this is a low chance to happen, it still can be helpful when dealing with high HP mobs if you're dealing with them, or it will not have any effect on bosses that have an insta-kill immunity. As for the third skill, this one provides a blue, orange, and violet gem and gives a 10% chance to stun for 1 turn. As this is an AoE, that's not too bad. You have an okay chance to stun one of the target enemies whenever you use this, if you go with the skill gem set. If you do not, going with something as all blue for the increased damage or all orange for the increased crit rate, either one would also be viable. As this skill also provides a buff to speed, if it does kill something, the violet gem just enhances that speed buff, allowing her to get an even faster turn advantage on your enemy. Moving over to the Dimension Slate, for her recommendations. Attack is something that is always nice for any DPS. You always want to focus attack. Other things that you would want to focus on with her are crit rate, mainly because of her skill 1. The other things that you can focus on her are physical and magic defense, so they're not too bad to have. If they are on your slate or they're there, you can keep them, because any magic or physical defense that you get will be instantly converted into attack. So in the case of mine at this moment, I have 200 magic defense. That is actually equal to 200 attack, as it gets converted by the passive. Other things that you would want to consider on her is HP. Trying to get as much HP as possible to have her survive better is very good, as she will have 0 PDEF and MDEF whenever you're in a battle. The higher HP is the only chance really you have of having her survive against hard-hitting opponents like bosses, especially in the stages 11 and 12. If you decide to use her there, I don't particularly recommend it because of the high amount of damage they do and no way to reduce it on her other than shields. The accuracy isn't as important on her, though she does have some debuffs. It's not as important as just her raw damage. So having crit power, attack, HP, physical, magic defense are the preferred ones on her. Unlike other DPSs, the physical and magic defense are useful to her as they are directly equal to attack. Gear sets for Caroline can be varied and you have many options to go for. The Baron J set is good if you're early or starting out and don't have access to the later gear sets from the molds and able to make them, as the Baron J set does provide additional crits on weakened opponents but also extra crit damage. You can go for the speed ones, or you can go for some of the sets that provide additional turns, like the Great Spirit set. The Great Spirit set, providing her with an additional turn if you use the full set, will allow her to instantly get a turn. If she, for example, uses her special skill for channeling, she can instantly gain a turn to get it off right away, meaning that you don't have to wait for her next turn to have that damage. That is particularly useful when fighting bosses, but not necessary for something. Instead, you can go for a higher damage build. In terms of gear for her too, stats that you can look for, like most every other DPS, attack is always what you want. Crit substats are always very good. Anything with crit damage is also good, as in most cases with bosses in the 1 through 10 stages, you will most likely be trying to do some type of paralyze on them with your Chloe Van, and in that case all hits are crits anyway, and if that's what you're using her in at the time, then the high crit rate isn't needed as much, as everything will be a crit anyway on a paralyzed target. But for later, you will want to focus on crits, especially if you want to use her in a PvP situation, as she will need the crit rate. Unlike other DPS though, Caroline does get a very good benefit from the increase in physical and magic defense. While as the others get some damage reduction or mitigation from having those there, they're not usually sought after as much as attack or crit damage substats for DPS gear. But in Caroline's case, the additional physical and magic defense are directly equal to attack. As an example, looking at the stats that I currently have on my Caroline, you can see that her attack at the moment is 18.7k. She has a physical defense of 7389 and a magic defense of 8190. This means that when she goes into battle, her physical and magic defense will drop to 0. When they drop to 0, the 7389 gets added to the 8190, which is roughly 15.57 or so K. So if we say it's roughly 15.5k, that 15.5k gets added to her base attack, meaning that her base attack is now 34k. It is just over 34k base attack, which is very high. When you combine that with the Weiwei buff of 90% or 100% or more if you have Weiwei on yellow gems, then she gets a very, very high base attack, allowing her to do a very high amount of damage to bosses or enemy targets. This is why the physical and magic defense on her are acceptable parts of the gear substats, and if you have a DPS gear that rolled a lot of extra PDEF or MDEF on it instead of attack, then you can put that gear on your Caroline instead of using it on one of your other DPS Elunes. That way those Elunes can have the higher base attack, because that will affect them better for their attack. Caroline overall is very good and probably the best boss killer for her damage because of how her mechanics work with her passives. Because of her passives, though, also reducing her physical and magic defense to 0, she can be very squishy, especially in the later stages of some of the boss fights. So you do need to make sure that you bring something with her to keep her alive, some type of healer that can heal her, or something that can give her a shield in the cases where shields are good, which is not always the case in all the boss fights. She can have an advantage. Certain boss fights at the stage 11 or 12, they do damage based on the physical or magic defense of the enemy. having Caroline as a frontline tank in those cases can work out in your advantage, as she has 0 physical and magic defense. This means if she is the one taking the boss hits, that boss will be doing 0 damage to her, which is also a soul damage, which means she will not take any damage at all, and your rest of your team will be safe from that. This is, however, though, can be problematic, as the other AoEs that the boss does, which is magic damage, will hit her quite hard. So you will need something, a very good healer or something, to keep her healthy or to keep her able to stay alive, to be able to use as that frontline tank for the boss when he deals the damage to her. For PvP, she can be effective, but she would need to be fast, and you would need to have your team tuned so that she can move quickly but also have a high amount of attack, as she doesn't necessarily need the Weiwei buff to do a high amount of damage. It is nice on her to have her move quickly, as you can start the fight with using, say, her ultimate skill, as it only needs 3 souls if you have buffs. Meaning that if you have someone buff first and she has those additional buffs, then she can immediately use her ultimate skill at a cost of only 3. However, in many cases this won't be able to happen, but she can still start channeling her skill 2 into a tank, and if you can provide some type of additional bonus damage to the tank or something to debuff it or apply a paralyze to it, in many cases she will be able to kill the tank on her next turn, or if you pass a turn to her. In many cases for PvP, the preferred magic damage dealer is going to be your Chloe Van, because the Chloe can target anybody in the front or back line and also provide a paralyze while providing high amounts of damage. So Caroline might not always be the best use Elune for PvP. She still is going to be very good and very well suited for PvE, especially boss fights. That's going to be it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, let me know below and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thank you.